Imagine you were driving like 70 miles an hour down the interstate.
Right.
And it's just pouring rain. I mean, visibility is terrible. And you are sandwiched right in the middle lane.
That's the worst feeling.
It really is. And, to your left and to your right are two massive tractor trailers. They weigh 80,000 pounds each.
Yeah, that's 40 tons of steel and freight.
Exactly. Just 40 tons hurtling down the highway inches from your family's car. And you naturally assume, right, that the people driving those rigs are highly trained professionals.
You'd hope so.
Yeah, you assume they are well rested, properly licensed, and, heavily regulated by this whole system designed to keep you safe.
But that's not exactly the reality.
No. What if I told you the person behind that wheel might not actually possess a valid license? What if they literally can't read the English warning signs on the road?
Yeah.
And what if they've been driving for 20 hours straight because a hacker sitting in an office in Serbia just rewrote their digital logbook?
It completely shatters that illusion of safety. I mean, completely.
It does.
And the terrifying part here is that this isn't, a hypothetical scenario from a movie or something. This is the actual structural reality of the North American supply chain right now.
It's wild because we see these big rigs every single day. We rely on them to stock our grocery shelves, to deliver our packages, to literally keep the blood pumping through the economy.
Right, they're everywhere.
But the actual machinery operating behind those cabs is just completely hidden in plain sight. So today's deep dive is going to fundamentally change how you look at the highway.
Definitely.
Our source material today is this extensive, deeply revealing interview from the Tucker Carlson YouTube channel. It features a man named Gord McGill.
Yeah, and McGill is a third-generation trucker.
Right. He has hauled freight everywhere from the Australian outback to the ice roads of the Canadian Northwest Territories. And he's the author of a book called End of the Road: Inside the War on Truckers.
He really knows the industry inside and out.
He does. And through his perspective, we are going to unpack how trucking went from this, celebrated icon of American independence to this de-skilled, highly exploited, and incredibly dangerous corporate shell game.
But before we go one step further, we do need to establish some ground rules for our conversation today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because the source material we are working with dives headfirst into some extremely charged political crosswinds.
For sure.
I mean, the interview covers border policies, immigration pipelines, the actions of previous and current presidential administrations, and, the fallout from the Canadian Freedom Convoy.
Right.
So I want to make it explicitly clear to you, the listener, that our mission today is not to take political sides.
Nope, not at all.
We are not here to endorse, validate, or condemn the viewpoints presented in the interview. Our job is strictly analytical.
Exactly.
We are going to neutrally unpack the arguments, the structural observations, and the factual claims that McGill presents. Because regardless of your politics, the mechanics of how our physical economy moves are just vital to understand.
Well said. We are just holding up a magnifying glass to the ideas contained in the original source material. So, okay, let's unpack this. Where do we start?
I think we start with a headline you have probably seen 1,000 times.
Oh, the driver shortage thing?
Yep. Every time there's a supply chain crisis or, every time a shelf is empty, the media trucks out the exact same phrase, the truck driver shortage.
Right. We are constantly told we just don't have enough people who want to drive trucks.
But McGill says this entire narrative is a manufactured myth.
A myth?
Yeah. And to understand the mechanics of why that myth exists, we really have to rewind the clock back to the year 1980.
Okay, walk me through what happened in 1980, because prior to that, being a trucker was a very different life, right?
It was an entirely different economic ecosystem. Prior to 1980, the trucking industry in the United States was highly, highly regulated.
How so?
Well, it was overseen by the Interstate Commerce Commission, or the ICC.
Right.
If you wanted to start a trucking company, you couldn't just, buy a truck and start hauling freight. You had to have specific government authority to operate on very specific routes. You even had to publish your shipping rates publicly, and those rates were largely fixed.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, McGill compares it to the taxi medallion system in major cities.
Oh, that makes sense.
The government actively controlled the supply of trucking companies to ensure that the market remained stable. And that meant carriers could charge enough to pay their drivers a very solid middle-class wage.
Which, to play devil's advocate, a lot of critics at the time argued was incredibly inefficient.
Oh, absolutely.
They viewed it as a government-enforced cartel. The
Mhm.
argument was that by strictly limiting competition, shipping rates were kept artificially high.
Right, which gets passed on to the buyer.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
meant everything from a gallon of milk to a new washing machine cost the consumer more money. So the push in 1980 was all about breaking that up in the name of the free market, right?
Exactly. The free market advocates, and this all culminated in the Motor Carrier Act of 1980, they pushed to deregulate the industry. The goal was to open the floodgates, increase competition, and drive down consumer prices. And, it worked.
But there was a catch.
A huge one. The pendulum swung with such violent force that it basically decimated the industry's workforce.
Wow.
McGill points out that overnight, the barrier to entry vanished. Suddenly, anybody with a few $100 and a pulse could file some paperwork and become a registered trucking company.
So you have this immediate, just chaotic rush to the bottom. You
Yeah.
have thousands of new, bare-bones startups flooding the market, radically undercutting the established shipping rates.
Exactly.
And the older, unionized trucking companies that actually paid pensions and solid wages, they suddenly couldn't compete. They start going bankrupt left and right.
Yep, they just collapsed.
And what happens to the human beings driving the trucks? They look around, they see their paychecks shrinking, the demands increasing, and the stability vanishing. So they do what any rational actor in a free market does.
They quit.
They quit. They go find jobs in construction or manufacturing.
Right, and this is where the economic hypocrisy that McGill highlights really comes into focus.
How so?
Well, think about it. In a functioning free market, if an entire industry suddenly experiences a massive retention crisis, like if your skilled laborers are walking out the door because the pay is too low, the free market dictates a very simple solution.
You raise wages.
Exactly. You have to raise your wages to attract and retain that talent. You improve the working conditions. You let the market find its equilibrium.
But I'm guessing the massive corporate shippers who just got these rock-bottom freight rates didn't want to go back to paying higher wages.
No, they definitely did not.
Wait, so they asked for a free market. When the free market dictated they needed to pay higher wages to retain workers, they asked the government to subsidize their training instead.
That is exactly what happened. They changed the narrative. They asked the government to bail them out of the exact free market they had lobbied for.
That's wild.
The source points to a pivotal moment in 1987. A major corporate lobby group called the American Trucking Associations, the ATA, released this highly publicized study.
Okay.
And this study made a catastrophic claim. It declared that if the industry didn't magically find an additional 600,000 truckers by the year 1990, the entire American economy was going to grind to a halt.
600,000. That is a staggering number to just pull out of the air.
It really is.
And let's be real, the economy did not collapse in 1990 due to a lack of truck drivers. But that 1987 ATA report, that was basically the birth of the driver shortage talking point. And it's a talking point that the corporate lobby still weaponizes today.
They absolutely do.
They go to the government, they scream that there is a massive shortage, and they use that panic to secure taxpayer subsidies for CDL commercial driver's license training schools.
Yep.
We're literally subsidizing the onboarding of new drivers because the mega carriers refuse to pay enough to keep the experienced ones.
And McGill insists the math just doesn't support the shortage narrative at all. There are millions of people in North America who hold valid CDLs.
Right, the licenses are out there.
Exactly. We do not have a shortage of qualified drivers. What we have is a catastrophic retention problem. We have a churn problem.
How bad is the churn?
Well, some of these massive publicly traded mega carriers operate with a driver turnover rate of 90 to 100% every single year.
Hold on, let me wrap my head around that. A 100% turnover rate.
Yeah.
That means if a company has 5,000 drivers on January 1st, by December 31st, every single one of those 5,000 people has quit and been replaced by somebody new.
That's exactly what it means.
If you had a normal office building with a 100% annual turnover rate, you wouldn't go to the news and say, we have a severe office worker shortage.
No, you wouldn't.
You would say, this office is an incredibly toxic, financially unviable place to work.
Precisely. And the source actually backs this up with academic data. McGill cites David Carell, a researcher at MIT, who presented findings to the government in 2021.
Oh, interesting. What did the MIT study say?
Carell's research stated definitively that there is no driver shortage. His conclusion was that the trucking industry suffers from a severe capacity utilization problem.
Okay, capacity utilization. That sounds like academic jargon. Break that down into what it actually looks like for the guy sitting in the cab of the truck.
It comes down to a concept called detention time.
Detention time. Okay.
Yeah. When a driver arrives at a massive distribution warehouse to load or unload their freight, they don't just, pull in and leave 5 minutes later.
Right, it's not a pit stop.
No. They're often forced to sit at the loading dock, just waiting for warehouse workers to get to their trailer. They might sit there for 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, sometimes an entire day.
Wow.
And the brutal economic reality is that for a massive percentage of these drivers, they are not paid for that waiting
So
time.
you're just sitting there for free.
Yep.
They are strictly paid by the mile driven. If the wheels aren't turning, they aren't earning.
So Carell's point is that the driver has the capacity to drive. They're physically there, ready to work. But the incredible inefficiency of the shippers and receivers is wasting that capacity.
Exactly.
They are trapping the driver in unpaid limbo. I mean, that alone explains why people quit.
Yeah.
You can't make a living if you spend half your week sitting for free behind a warehouse.
Right. It's financially ruinous.
But instead of fixing the detention time or raising the per-mile rate, the corporate strategy was just to find cheaper bodies to fill the seats.
Yep, just cycle them through.
And to do that, they had to fundamentally change the nature of the job itself.
Which brings us to the really profound cultural and operational shift in the industry, the deliberate de-skilling of the profession.
The de-skilling.
Yeah. To fully appreciate this, you have to understand what a truck driver used to be. The media often referred to them as the last American cowboy.
I love that phrase. It was a role defined by high competence, autonomy, and real mechanical mastery. McGill's own family history maps this perfectly.
Oh, right, his grandfather.
Yes, his grandfather landed at Normandy in a Sherman tank during World War II. He came home and drove a truck across the Trans-Canada Highway in the 1960s.
That sounds intense.
It was. We're talking about driving across the frozen expanse of Lake Superior in winter in a rig with no sleeper bunk, just, sleeping across the bench seats.
No way.
Yeah, no air conditioning, constantly managing the mechanical thread of the truck, literally freezing solid.
That requires an intense level of situational awareness. You have to be a master of your machine.
Absolutely.
The interview also mentions McGill's own experience driving road trains in the Australian outback.
Oh yeah, that's fascinating.
For those who don't know, a road train is a massive tractor pulling 3, sometimes 4 trailers behind it. It's essentially a freight train on rubber tires.
Yeah, they're huge.
And he was hauling heavy equipment for offshore drilling rigs, driving like 700 miles north of Perth into the deep desert.
Middle of nowhere.
Literally, if you blow a tire out there, or if an airline snaps, you can't just pull out your smartphone and call AAA.
No, nobody's coming to help you.
You have to fix it yourself. You have to carry the tools, understand the pneumatics, and physically wrestle the repair in the dirt. You are a highly competent, self-reliant operator.
But according to the source, the modern North American corporate trucking industry explicitly does not want that kind of operator anymore.
Wait, they don't want competent people.
Well, a highly skilled, competent operator knows their worth, right?
True.
They demand a premium wage. They will push back against unsafe or abusive dispatchers. The corporate model realized that to keep wages rock bottom and turnover high, they needed to lower the barrier to entry so far that absolutely anyone could do the job.
I see.
They wanted to replace the skilled operator with what the industry derisively calls a steering wheel holder.
A steering wheel holder. Wow. And how did they physically engineer the skill out of the cab?
The most obvious mechanical shift was the transition from manual transmissions to automatic transmissions.
Ah, okay.
For decades, driving a big rig meant mastering a complex manual gearbox, 10-speed, 13-speed, 18-speed transmissions.
Right, with the massive shifters.
Yeah, you had to learn how to double clutch, how to match your engine RPMs to the road speed, how to properly use engine braking on steep grades. It took real time and dedication to learn.
But the industry pushed aggressively for automatic fleets. Now, wait a minute.
Yeah.
The industry PR spin on automatic transmissions is always that it's about fuel efficiency. The computer can shift smoother, save diesel, and reduce emissions. Is McGill saying that's a lie?
He argues that while there may be some fringe marginal benefits to fuel economy on a spreadsheet, the primary overriding motivation for the shift to automatics was labor replacement.
Labor replacement.
Yes, if you don't have to spend weeks teaching a new recruit the intricate physical skill of shifting an 18-speed transmission, you can push them through a CDL training mill in a fraction of the time.
Ah, I get it.
You remove the mechanical learning curve entirely.
It's exactly like taking the artistry out of being a chef by replacing the entire restaurant kitchen with a bank of microwaves.
That's a perfect analogy.
Sure, if all you have to do is push a button on a microwave, you have suddenly solved your chef shortage because literally anyone off the street can push the button.
Right.
But the quality of the meal completely plummets, the safety of the food prep is compromised, and the person pushing the button takes zero pride in the work because the skill has been surgically removed from the job.
And that loss of pride is a massive psychological component. McGill argues that the driver is no longer treated as the captain of the ship.
They're just a button pusher.
Worse. He says they're treated as a biological liability, a human robot whose only purpose is to blindly follow the algorithmic commands of the onboard computers, the GPS routing, and the driver-facing cameras monitoring their eye movements.
That sounds miserable. And the irony is the source claims this drive for simplicity actually makes things vastly more dangerous.
Oh, it really does.
McGill makes this mind-blowing comparison. He spent 4 seasons as an ice road trucker in the Northwest Territories in Canada, right?
Yes, he did.
We've all seen the reality shows driving 40-ton trucks across frozen lakes in the Arctic Circle. You would think that has to be the most lethal trucking job on planet Earth.
But McGill says the exact opposite. He states the ice roads are actually incredibly safe.
Wait, really? How?
Well, yes, the environment has harsh temperatures hitting 40 or 50 degrees below zero, but the ecosystem is entirely managed by competent professionals.
Oh.
They use ground-penetrating radar to test the ice thickness every day. They plow the lanes 100 feet wide. The maximum speed limit is strictly enforced at around 17 miles per hour.
So they control the variables.
Exactly. And most importantly, you are surrounded exclusively by other highly skilled veteran drivers.
So competence creates safety.
Yes.
And what does he say is the actual most dangerous trucking environment?
Driving up and down Interstate 81 or Interstate 40 in America today.
Wow. Not the ice roads, the interstate.
Because there, you are surrounded by heavily de-skilled, untrained, and often deeply exhausted steering wheel holders who have no idea how to actually handle the kinetic energy of the machine they are piloting.
Which naturally leads to the darkest part of this entire system. If you deliberately design a job to be physically grueling, deeply isolating, and financially unrewarding,
Yeah.
and you remove all the pride and skill from it, American and Canadian citizens are simply going to refuse to do it.
And they are refusing.
Right. So how do these mega carriers keep the seats filled? Where do the bodies come from?
Yeah, this is where it gets really bleak.
The source details an incredibly grim pipeline of exploitation, which revolves around something called the donkey route.
This is a crucial element of McGill's analysis, and I want to reiterate a point he makes very explicitly in the interview.
Good.
When we talk about the massive influx of foreign drivers into this system, the immigrants themselves are not the villains of the story.
Right, that's very important to state.
They are not the orchestrators of this chaos. They are the victims of severe, systemic economic exploitation by the corporate logistics apparatus.
They are being chewed up by a machine designed to extract cheap labor.
Exactly.
So walk me through the mechanics of this donkey route. How does a young guy from halfway across the world end up driving a truck through Ohio?
The source outlines a massive human smuggling pipeline, predominantly funneling young men from India, particularly the Punjab region.
Okay.
They are sold this digital dream. They see videos on social media of people posing with nice trucks and big houses in North America, and they're told they can have that life too.
But there's a cost.
A massive cost. To get it, they accrue life-altering debt to human smuggling networks. McGill notes this debt is often around $30,000.
$30,000? That's insurmountable in many parts of the world.
It really is. The smugglers fly them to transit countries, often in Central or South America, and they make the long, dangerous journey north to the U.S. or Canadian border.
And once they hit the border, the legal strategy begins. McGill specifically mentions that the predominant tactic is to claim asylum.
Yes.
For instance, he notes that many individuals are instructed to claim they are Khalistani separatists who are fleeing political persecution from Narendra Modi's government in India.
Right. And because the immigration court system is so catastrophically backlogged, an asylum claim triggers a process that can take years to resolve.
But they don't just sit in a cell for years.
No. In the meantime, the claimants are frequently issued EADs, employment authorization documents.
Which lets them work.
Yes. This gives them instant legal permission to work in the United States, often with absolutely zero background vetting regarding their driving history, their criminal record, or their true identity back in their home country.
So they get this fast-tracked work authorization, and the immediate next step is getting a CDL.
Right.
The interview claims there are entire networks of fraudulent CDL testing sites. They specifically call out states like Florida and Texas as massive hubs for this corruption.
Which goes to show this isn't a neat partisan issue, right? It's happening everywhere.
Exactly. The implication is that people are literally paying bribes to pass the CDL exam or having someone else take the test for them.
Yeah, they're just buying the license.
So now you have a young man saddled with $30,000 in smuggler debt, holding a freshly printed, possibly fraudulent CDL. Where does he go to work?
He gets funneled right into the shadow trucking companies.
Shadow companies.
Yeah, these are often small LLC fleets run by their own co-ethnics. And this is where the financial trap snaps shut on the driver and where the domestic tax base gets hollowed out.
Okay, break that down.
In Canada, they refer to this scheme as Driver Inc. In Australia, it's known as sham contracting. In the U.S., it's rampant 1099 fraud.
Explain how sham contracting actually works. Like, how does the company benefit?
The mechanism is misclassification. The trucking company hires the driver, but instead of putting them on the books as an official employee, a W-2 worker in the U.S., they force the driver to register as an independent contractor.
A 1099 worker.
Exactly. And by doing this, the trucking company completely evades paying employer payroll taxes.
Ah, I see.
They don't pay into unemployment insurance.
Yeah.
They don't offer health benefits, and they don't contribute to pensions or workers' compensation. Their operational overhead is artificially slashed to rock bottom.
And because their overhead is so low, they can bid on freight contracts at rates that are impossibly cheap.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, multi-generational domestic trucking companies, the folks who actually play by the rules, who pay W-2 taxes, who carry proper liability insurance, who pay their drivers a living wage, they are actively going bankrupt.
They can't compete. McGill points out that the industry has been in a great freight recession since 2022. The legitimate companies simply cannot survive against this shadow economy built on exploited, myth-classified labor.
And McGill connects this back to a massive macroeconomic strategy, right?
Yeah, he does.
Because the drivers in the system are living incredibly precarious lives. They are often living inside the truck, cooking on hot plates, sending almost every dollar they earn back home to pay off their smugglers and support their families.
Right, remittances. McGill notes that India's GDP relies heavily on these global remittances.
So it's not just a localized problem.
No, he views this not just as an accident of border policy, but as an unofficial strategy by governments like Modi's to export their excess unemployed young male population to the West.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, acts as a pressure release valve for their domestic economy, while extracting billions of dollars in remittances out of North America.
And the human tragedy of this trap is just staggering.
It really is.
There was a specific detail in the interview that actually stopped me in my tracks. McGill said he went on to GoFundMe, the crowdfunding website, and he just typed in the surname Singh, looking specifically for campaigns related to trucking accidents in North America.
Yeah, and the result he found was deeply unsettling. He found 249 active GoFundMe campaigns.
249, just for one surname. These are families desperately trying to raise money to pay catastrophic hospital bills for uninsured drivers, or tragically trying to raise enough money just to fly the remains of a deceased young man back to India.
It's heartbreaking.
It is modern indentured servitude happening right in the right-hand lane of the interstate. How is this level of systemic human tragedy just completely flying under the radar of our regulatory agencies?
McGill argues it flies under the radar because our regulatory agencies are infected with a pathology he calls spreadsheet brain.
I love that term, spreadsheet brain. I feel like that applies to so much more than just trucking.
Oh, absolutely.
It's how modern healthcare works. It's how corporate HR works. But explain how he applies it to the federal regulators here.
Spreadsheet brain is the bureaucratic tendency to completely ignore a massive observable reality if that reality hasn't been perfectly quantified in official government data.
So if it's not on the spreadsheet, it doesn't exist.
Exactly. If the spreadsheet doesn't have a column to track a specific problem, the institution refuses to acknowledge the problem exists. They look at the blank column and say, see, no data, no problem.
Okay, so if the Highway Patrol responds to a massive multi-vehicle pileup caused by a truck, how does the spreadsheet miss the root cause? don't they write a report?
They do, but standard non-fatal commercial crash reports do not ask the right questions.
What do you mean?
The police report doesn't track the immigration status of the driver. It doesn't track the specific CDL school that issued their license or investigate whether that school was a fraud mill.
So they just log it as a standard crash.
Exactly. Unless there is a massive multi-fatality event that triggers a deep National Transportation Safety Board investigation, the data collected is incredibly surface level.
Wow.
So when regulators look at the aggregate data, they just see a generic driver error crash. They don't see the underlying pipeline of untrained, heavily indebted, newly arrived drivers causing the spike in accidents.
Which brings us to the actual physical safety fallout of putting these exploited workers behind the wheel.
Right.
The source highlights a very specific federal regulation regarding language. Since 1937, it has been federal law in the United States that to hold a commercial driver's license and operate a big rig, you must possess a basic command of the English language.
Which is entirely logical. I mean, it's not about cultural assimilation. It's about life or death safety.
Of course.
You have to be able to communicate with highway patrol or way station officers.
Yeah.
You have to be able to read overhead dynamic message signs, warning of bridge collapses or construction zones ahead.
Right. But McGill points out that in 2016, during the final days of the Obama administration, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the FMCSA, essentially waived the enforcement of this rule.
Yep.
The directive told inspectors to stop placing drivers out of service if they couldn't speak English. Instead, they were just supposed to hand them a citation, a fine, and let them keep driving.
And the results of waiving that basic safety requirement have been undeniably lethal. The source brings up a horrific, tragic example at Wolf Creek Pass in Colorado.
I know Wolf Creek Pass. For anyone who hasn't driven it, it is a terrifying stretch of road in the Rocky Mountains.
It really is.
It's at 11,000 feet of elevation. You are coming down an incredibly steep, miles-long grade. When you are driving a heavily loaded truck down a mountain like that, you cannot just ride your foot brake.
No, absolutely not.
If you do, the friction will literally boil your brake fluid, the brake pads will catch on fire, and you will suffer total brake failure in a matter of minutes. You have to use engine braking downshifting and letting the compression of the engine hold the truck back.
But if a driver makes a mistake and their brakes do fail, the state has built runaway truck ramps.
Right.
These are steep uphill lanes off to the side of the highway filled with deep, soft gravel designed to safely bog down and stop a runaway truck.
But those ramps are only useful if you know what they are and where they are.
Exactly. And according to the source, a driver from India who had been pushed through this exploitative pipeline and could not read English suffered massive brake failure coming down Wolf Creek Pass.
Oh, no!
He was speeding out of control. But because he couldn't read the massive yellow warning signs indicating the location of the runaway truck ramp, he blew right past them.
That's awful.
He ultimately lost control of the vehicle, went off the side of the mountain, and was killed.
It's just horrific. And it wasn't an isolated incident. The interview mentions another crash in Colorado where a driver from Cuba didn't understand the signage, bypassed the safety ramps, and plowed in to stop traffic on Interstate 70, causing a massive inferno that killed multiple innocent people.
It's a systemic failure.
And it's not just the mountains where this lack of training and compliance is lethal.
No, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
The source cites a case in a rural county in Indiana.
What happened there?
A driver originally from Kyrgyzstan, working for a Chicago-based shadow company, got confused on a two-lane road. Instead of pulling over to figure out his routing, he veered into oncoming traffic and hit a passenger van head-on, killing 4 Amish men.
My God.
And McGill notes that just a week later, in the exact same county, local police pulled over another truck that had blown straight through a stop sign. When they asked the driver for his paperwork, they discovered he was an illegal immigrant who didn't even possess a commercial driver's license of any kind.
Wait, are you telling me there are people just driving 80,000-pound trucks with no license at all?
That is exactly what the source is claiming.
That is terrifying.
McGill stresses that by completely abandoning the barrier to entry, we're introducing people into a common public space, the interstate highway system, who operate entirely outside of the American compliance and safety culture.
Because they just don't know the rules.
They simply don't have the training. And because they're trapped in that debt cycle to their smugglers, they don't have the luxury of telling an abusive dispatcher, no, I'm too tired to drive, or no, this truck's brakes are faulty, I'm not moving it.
So they just push through. So the government solution to all of this chaos has mostly been technological, right?
Yeah, they love a tech fix.
They think they can solve the safety crisis with software. And this brings us to the ELDs, the electronic logging devices.
Right, the DLDs.
2017, the federal government mandated that every commercial truck had to be retrofitted with an ELD. The logic was that it would stop drivers from cheating on their paper logbooks and driving while exhausted.
Makes sense in theory.
Right, but McGill argues that the ELD mandate actually made the highways infinitely more dangerous. How does a safety device cause more accidents?
It causes more accidents because the technology completely ignores the economic reality of the driver.
Okay, explain that.
Let's go back to our discussion about detention time. The driver is paid by the mile, right?
Right.
But the ELD rigidly tracks their hours of service. Once the driver starts their day, a digital 14-hour clock starts ticking. They can only drive for 11 of those 14 hours.
I see where this is going. It's like wearing a fitness tracker that legally forces you to sprint right when you're the most exhausted.
That is exactly what it's like.
If you show up to a warehouse at 8 a.m., your clock starts. But the warehouse detains you at the dock for 6 hours, unpaid. By the time you are finally loaded and pulling out onto the highway, it's 2:00 p.m.
Yep.
You've made $0, but your 14-hour daily clock has been burning the entire time.
Exactly. You now only have a few hours left before the ELD physically alerts dispatch and legally prohibits you from driving further.
Wow.
So the absolute second that driver hits the highway, they are intensely economically incentivized to drive like an absolute maniac.
Because they have to make up for lost time.
Yes. They will speed, they will tailgate, they will drive aggressively through construction zones, they will take massive risks in bad weather, all to cover as many miles as humanly possible to make up their lost wages before the machine locks them out.
It induces panic.
It really does.
The driver isn't managing their fatigue based on how their body feels. They are racing a digital countdown timer. And the source actually cites a study by Overdrive Online that proved this, right?
Yes.
It showed that citations for aggressive driving, speeding, and actual crash rates went up after the ELD mandate was enforced.
It backfired completely.
But here's the craziest part of the ELD story. We force this digital leash onto the drivers in the name of perfect compliance, but the bad actors are just hacking the devices anyway.
Yep, they are.
Walk me through how you hack a physical truck.
It exposes a massive vulnerability in the certification process. The companies that manufacture these ELDs are allowed to self-certify to the government that their devices are secure.
Self-certify. What could go wrong?
Right. And McGill reveals they are incredibly porous. The ELD plugs into the truck's diagnostic port in the ECM, or engine control module. It reads the GPS, the odometer, the engine RPMs.
Mm-hmm.
But drivers who are running out of legal hours have figured out how to bypass it remotely.
Wait, remotely? How does a guy in Serbia hack a truck driving through Nebraska?
Through third-party spoofing software and API vulnerabilities,
Okay.
a driver can get on an encrypted messaging app like Telegram. They message an individual sitting in a boiler room in places like Serbia or Eastern Europe.
Just randomly on Telegram.
Yeah. For a small fee, that hacker uses a backdoor to remotely access the ELD's software interface.
That is insane.
They can digitally rewrite the logbook, spoof the GPS coordinates to make it look like the truck has been parked and resting for 10 hours, and reset the driver's clock, allowing them to keep driving illegally.
That is unbelievable. We mandate a system that stresses out the legitimate drivers and causes more accidents, while the shadow fleets just pay hackers on Telegram to erase their violations entirely.
That is the reality of the road right now.
Which raises the biggest question of all. If all these safety violations, all these crashes, all these hacked logbooks are happening, how are the massive corporate brands avoiding the legal fallout?
They have a system for that too.
If a truck carrying goods for a mega retailer kills a family in a crash, why doesn't that retailer get sued into bankruptcy?
This is the crux of the corporate shell game. It is a structural evasion of liability using a logistics model known as power only.
Walk me through power only. How does it shield the big brands?
Historically, a massive trucking company, let's say a household name, owned the actual truck cab, they owned the trailer holding the freight, and they directly employed the W-2 driver.
Okay, so they own the whole process.
Right. If that driver caused a crash, the massive company was vicariously liable. They had deep pockets, so they could be sued for hundreds of millions of dollars.
Makes sense.
But companies like Amazon Relay, J.B. Hunt, and large freight brokers realized that owning the trucks and employing the drivers was an enormous legal liability. So they transitioned to power only.
Meaning they only own the trailer?
Correct. The mega corporation owns the branded box holding the freight, but they subcontract the actual pulling of that trailer. the power to smaller independent carriers.
Oh, I see.
McGill points out that upwards of 90% of the capacity for networks like Amazon Relay is provided by these tiny subcontractors.
And who are these subcontractors?
They are exactly the shadow LLCs we've been talking about.
Unbelievable.
They're the small fleets headquartered overseas or operating out of residential addresses in cities like Chicago or Glendale, California, employing the misclassified vulnerable labor.
I get it. It's a legal firewall. The mega corporation gets all the upside of rock bottom exploited freight rates.
Exactly.
But when that untrained, exhausted subcontractor inevitably blows a tire and causes a fatal pileup, the mega brand washes its hands of the blood. They go to court and say, hey, don't look at us. We just own the box. The guy driving the truck was an independent contractor. Sue his LLC.
McGill calls it a skin suit.
A skin suit. That is a dark image.
It is, but it's accurate. They maintain the shiny, compliant, American-branded facade. But inside the suit, the actual labor is being done by an untraceable shadow economy.
And when the authorities finally do manage to track down one of these shadow LLCs, they encounter the chameleon carrier tactic, right?
Yes, the chameleon carriers.
I love this concept because it perfectly explains the Hydra problem. A small subcontractor accumulates too many safety violations, or the Department of Transportation actually flags them for an audit. If they were a legitimate business, they would have to pay fines or get shut down. But what do they actually do?
They treat the company like a burner phone.
Just toss it.
The moment the heat gets too high, they simply shut down that specific LLC. They abandon their current motor carrier or MC registration number, and the very next day, the exact same owners file paperwork online to open a brand new company with a freshly minted MC number.
Just throw the burner phone away and buy a new one?
Yep.
They take the exact same trucks, peel the old stickers off the doors, slap the new company name on it, put the exact same exploited drivers behind the wheel, and start bidding on freight again. And their safety record has been magically wiped, completely clean.
The regulators are playing whack-a-mole with a ghost.
But there is some legal pushback starting, right? The interview mentioned a massive lawsuit in Oklahoma.
Yes, there is. Legitimate, multi-generational Oklahoma trucking companies have filed a massive lawsuit, but they aren't suing the chameleon carriers.
What are they going after?
They're going after the source of the money. The mega freight brokers, companies like C.H. Robinson and TQL.
Okay.
The lawsuit alleges that these massive brokers are actively and knowingly undercutting legitimate American businesses by intentionally farming out freight to these unsafe, illegal chameleon carriers just to maximize their profit margins.
Wow. So they're trying to pierce that veil.
Exactly. It's a huge test case to see if the legal system can pierce that power, only corporate veil, and hold the brokers accountable for the safety of the supply chain they created.
But this chaotic, completely disconnected system isn't just dangerous from a physical safety perspective. It has created an environment ripe for massive organized criminal theft.
Oh, the freight fraud is rampant.
And here's where we get into the mechanics of that fraud. The interview brings up this wild anecdote where an entire tractor trailer loaded with Alp nicotine pouches was simply stolen from a facility.
Just drove off of it.
Someone walked in with a fake ID, hooked their truck up to the trailer, and drove away. The cargo vanished into thin air. How is that mechanically possible in an era where every single truck and phone has GPS tracking?
It happens through a digital scam known as double brokering.
Double brokering.
It's essentially a sophisticated man-in-the-middle attack on the freight market. Let's walk through the steps.
Let's do it.
A legitimate shipper, say, a manufacturer of nicotine pouches needs a load moved. They hire a broker to find a truck. That broker posts the load on a digital load board, like Dan Rye or Truck Stop.
Which is basically like Craigslist for freight.
Exactly. Now, a seemingly legitimate trucking company bids on that load and wins the contract.
Okay, seems normal.
But that company is actually a criminal front. They have no intention of ever picking up the freight. Instead, they take the contract and they illegally repost it on the load board, brokering it again to someone else.
So they are acting as an unauthorized middleman.
Yes. And they might double broker it to a legitimate driver who is desperate for work, or they might coordinate with an organized theft ring.
Right.
By the time the actual truck arrives at the shipping facility, there are so many opaque layers of digital anonymity Many of the scammers operating out of internet cafes in places like Colombia, Pakistan, or Eastern Europe that the facility operators have no idea who they are actually handing the freight to.
And the theft rings are highly coordinated. McGill specifically names the Sing organization, which was a massive organized crime ring operating out of California.
Yeah, they were huge.
They were recently busted by the FBI for stealing hundreds of millions of dollars in commercial cargo. They exploited these exact digital blind spots. A legitimate driver might pick up the load, but the scammers spoof the GPS data being sent back to the broker.
Right.
They direct the driver to a random truck stop, have them drop the trailer, and a different cab hooks up to it and disappears. The load is fenced on the black market before the original shipper even realizes it's missing.
Which naturally leads us to the most terrifying conclusion of the entire interview.
Seriously.
If a criminal syndicate in California, coordinating with scammers in Colombia, can manipulate the North American supply chain to effortlessly steal hundreds of millions of dollars in retail goods, what happens when foreign adversaries realize what else is moving on our highways?
Exactly, because it's not just nicotine pouches, flat-screen TVs, and groceries inside those trailers. This brings us to the national security risks.
It's a huge blind spot.
McGill points out that critical, sensitive government freight is being hauled within this exact same corrupted, double-brokered system. We are talking about United States Postal Service mail and actual military freight for the Department of Defense.
Now, on paper, there are incredibly strict federal regulations regarding government freight.
Obviously.
The law states that U.S. postal mail can only be handled and driven by American citizens. Furthermore, military freight must be hauled by specifically approved, deeply vetted domestic carriers.
But those rules aren't being followed.
No. McGill, alongside researchers like Danielle Chauvin, who runs the Highway Veritas Substack, has meticulously documented that these regulations are being flagrantly ignored on a daily basis.
Because the government contractors are using the power-only model.
Exactly.
A massive, approved defense logistics contractor wins the bid to move military equipment. But instead of using their own vetted drivers, they subcontract the loadout. It trickles down the load boards, it gets double brokered, and suddenly you have a load of military hardware being pulled by an unvetted, non-domiciled driver operating a chameleon carrier out of an ethnic enclave in Chicago.
And this creates a catastrophic, real-time intelligence leak.
How so?
Think back to the ELDs, those mandatory electronic logging devices. They aren't just timers. They are massive data harvesting nodes.
Oh, right. They track everything.
The ELD tracks the truck's exact GPS location second by second. It stores digital copies of the shipping manifests and procurement documents. It contains all text communications with dispatch. Many of them even have driver-facing and road-facing cameras that upload photos to the cloud.
So think about how closely you guard your own smartphone data. You don't want a random app tracking your location or accessing your camera. Now imagine a tractor-trailer hauling sensitive domestic military equipment, missile components, ammunition, armored vehicle parts, classified communications gear. That truck is actively broadcasting its real-time GPS coordinates, its route, and its cargo manifest to an ELD server.
Yeah.
And we already established that these trucking networks and ELD software systems are deeply intertwined with and routinely accessed by foreign nationals in places like Serbia, Moldova, and India.
The metadata generated by this logistics network is a goldmine for foreign intelligence.
It has to be.
It shows exactly where our domestic military bases are located, what the intake and delivery schedules look like, where the blind spots are, and which specific transit routes are the most vulnerable. This sensitive data is actively leaving the country on a daily basis.
It is absolute insanity. McGill asks this incredibly poignant question. How did a mundane domestic labor issue regarding driver retention and corporate wage suppression morph into a massive geopolitical blind spot?
It's crazy to think about.
We are literally paying foreign shadow companies operating completely outside our compliance culture to actively map the critical infrastructure and military supply lines of the United States.
And as the interview progresses, McGill argues that this is not strictly an American phenomenon.
Right.
To understand the full scope of this neoliberal economic model, we have to look north, because the source material spends a significant amount of time analyzing the political and economic situation in Canada. McGill views his home country as the canary in the coal mine for these exact policies.
Let's pivot to Canada then, and just as a quick reminder to our listeners, we are stepping into domestic Canadian politics here.
Yes.
We are neutrally outlining McGill's perspective and the facts he presents, as this gives us a window into how these logistics policies affect society on a macro level. So, what is the Canadian context he lays out?
McGill argues that the Canadian social and economic fabric is severely fraying, and it is being driven by the exact same elite consensus that ruined the trucking industry.
The push for cheap labor.
It's exactly the relentless prioritization of cheap, temporary, exploitable labor over domestic stability. He cites incredibly bleak economic indicators, highlighting high youth unemployment rates among native-born Canadians.
Okay.
He contrasts this with the staggering figure that there are currently around 5 million people residing in Canada on various temporary work permits and student visas, many of whom are being funneled into these exact same low-wage gig economy and logistics jobs.
He paints a picture of a government that is completely captured by corporate interests. He points to massive corporate subsidies that seem entirely disconnected from the well-being of the working class.
The Stellantis deal is a big one he mentioned.
Right. Stellantis, the massive multinational parent company of Chrysler. According to the interview, the Canadian government gave Stellantis an astronomical $15 billion subsidy to incentivize domestic electric vehicle and battery manufacturing.
$15 billion. That's massive.
But shortly after securing that bag of taxpayer money, Stellantis allegedly pivoted and announced a massive $13 billion investment across the border in the United States instead.
And for McGill, that Stellantis deal is emblematic of the larger rot.
How so?
It is a government that allows transnational corporate entities to strip mine the national economy, take the tax dollars, and offer absolutely zero loyalty or accountability to the blue-collar workers who actually live there.
So they just take the money and run.
Essentially. And this deep, systemic sense of blue-collar alienation and elite betrayal is the essential lens through which McGill views the Canadian Freedom Convoy protests of 2022.
The trucker protests, that was obviously a massive global news story. But McGill provides some really fascinating legal updates on the fallout from those protests that completely contradict the initial media narratives we were all fed.
Yeah, the updates are pretty surprising.
For example, he talks about the individuals known as the Coots Four. These were protesters arrested at the Coots border crossing in Alberta, and initially the media painted them as this highly dangerous, organized militant cell.
Right, they were framed as a major threat.
But McGill notes that the Coots Four are now out of jail, and that the most severe sensational charges against them, specifically the charges of conspiracy to murder police officers, were entirely dropped by the prosecution due to lack of evidence.
So the initial narrative of a violent, organized terror cell quietly evaporated in the actual courtroom.
Exactly. And he also brings up a massive landmark legal ruling that hasn't gotten nearly enough attention. It's known as the Mosley decision.
Yes, the Mosley decision.
During the protests, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act, which is essentially martial law light. It allowed the government to unilaterally freeze the bank accounts of protesters and violently crack down on the demonstrations in Ottawa.
But what did the courts actually say about that?
Earlier this year, a Canadian federal court judge, Justice Richard Mosley, issued a ruling stating that the Trudeau government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act was legally unjustified, unreasonable, and ultimately unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional.
Yeah. The legal threshold for a national emergency was simply not met by a group of trucks parked in the capital.
But despite that massive constitutional rebuke, McGill points out that absolutely none of the political elites faced any consequences.
None at all.
He specifically names figures like Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, who championed those unconstitutional measures but suffered zero political fallout.
In fact, rather than self-reflecting, the Canadian government seems to be doubling down.
They are.
McGill points to new Canadian speech legislation, specifically Bills C-63 and C-9, which propose incredibly draconian penalties for online speech.
Right.
He views these bills as evidence that the elite class is far more interested in actively suppressing and criminalizing blue-collar dissent than they are in addressing the underlying economic rot that caused the protests in the first place.
It's a holistic critique of a managerial class that has lost all connection to the physical world. Synthesizing all of this, the picture that Gordon McGill paints of the modern logistics industry is incredibly stark.
It's pretty grim.
The trucking industry hasn't just experienced a few tough economic years. It has been subjected to a systemic, intentional, decades-long transformation. It was once a proud, well-regulated profession that demanded high competence, technical mastery, and offered a stable, dignified middle-class life.
But through the chaos of deregulation, the weaponized myth of the driver shortage, and the relentless sociopathic drive for ever cheaper labor, the industry has been hollowed out.
Completely hollowed out.
It has been transformed into a race-to-the-bottom gig economy. By engineering the skill out of the trucks, by treating drivers not as essential professionals, but as disposable biological cogs to be harassed by ELD algorithms and discarded when they burn out, the massive freight corporations have invited immense human tragedy.
They really have.
They have built an economic model reliant on the indentured exploitation of vulnerable immigrants. They have jeopardized public safety on every single interstate highway in North America, and they have opened up startling national security vulnerabilities that we are only just beginning to comprehend.
It is the ultimate manifestation of spreadsheet brain.
Spreadsheet brain.
Yeah. It is a profound shift from a physical economy based on human competence and accountability to a financialized system based on corporate evasion, legal shell games, and technological control.
So why should you, the listener, care about any of this? Why does the structure of a power-only freight contract matter to your daily life?
It matters a lot.
Because tomorrow morning you are going to get in your car, you are going to pull onto the highway, and you are going to merge right in between two of these 80,000-pound vehicles. Every time you order a package to your front door, every time you buy groceries to feed your family, every time you expect the basic physical infrastructure of your modern world to function,
You are relying entirely on this exact, fragile, and deeply compromised supply chain.
you are sharing the road with the consequences of these policies.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative question to mull over.
What's that?
If we as a society continue to intentionally de-skill our most crucial physical industries, if we relentlessly prioritize cheaper labor, automation, and corporate liability dodging over actual human mastery, what happens when the next true global crisis hits?
Oh, wow.
When the algorithms inevitably fail, or the GPS networks are jammed by a foreign adversary, or the digital supply chains completely freeze, will we have any competent, experienced human operators left who actually know how to manually steer the ship?
At the start of this deep dive, we talked about how comforting it is to see the physical infrastructure around us. You look out the window, the big rigs are always there, rolling down the highway.
They look so permanent.
But now you know that visibility is just a facade. The real machine is invisible, it's vastly more complex and ruthless than we ever imagined, and it might just be running completely out of control. Thanks for exploring the depths of this with us. We'll see you next time.